Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our very first live interview with the Truthseeker project. I am delighted to have with me today Jane Metcalfe, who's going to be telling us all about the Robin Garbutt case. So first of all, Jane, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so pleased to have you as our very first guest.
Thank you.
Would you like to kick us off just by giving us some background to this case?
Yeah, hi Sandra. Thanks very much for having us. Robin and the family are really chuffed about the whole thing. It's great. Really feel very honoured. So thank you for wanting Robin's story on here. Yeah, the background of the case. If I maybe start by saying how I know Robin was from many years ago. Robin's long-term girlfriend is a really close friend of mine, and they were together for quite a long time. So that's how I initially knew Robin, and then they parted. They parted company and sold the house that they had, and then Robin went on to buy another house. And the background of him and Diana is that they met, and Diana moved into his house when they met, and then they bought the post office, the Melsonby post office in North Yorkshire in 2003, which is when they got married. And they wanted to set up a business together and live and work together. And Melsonby, the post office is right on a very busy junction in the little village. It's a lovely, gorgeous little village. I think it's 700 people approximately. So the post office was a real hub of the village. It was where everybody did the meeting, and everybody knew everybody, and all the children would gather there on a morning before they got the bus to school. And Robin would start serving customers from sort of 4:30 in the morning. It was a really stable boys, and it was on the junction of the A1, so lots of people came off the motorway onto the little link where the post office was. And everything was good. The post office, it's worth mentioning, before Robin and Diana bought it, the post office was had two armed robberies before they bought it, which is kind of, it's important to know that. And then, so they sadly were robbed in 2009, and the 17th of March 2009, which was a Tuesday, which was the day that Robin didn't have any staffing on a Tuesday. He worked on his own, and they were robbed. Then there was never any suggestion at that point that the robbery was anything other than a genuine robbery. The post office agreed, and the police agreed. There was never anything to suggest anything otherwise. And then, shall I go on and say about what happened on the 23rd, on the 23rd of March in 2010?
Yeah, because that lets everybody know why we're here and what this is all about.
Yeah. So life was really good for them. Everything was happy. They had a nice life. Happy people. And then tragically on the 23rd of March in 2010, so it's almost a year to the day, also on a Tuesday, they suffered another armed robbery. Only this time, the robbers had gone upstairs into their private quarters, and Diana was killed by 3 blows to her head from a metal bar. The reason that the robbers would have gone upstairs was because upstairs in the living quarters was a second safe, and it could be seen from downstairs in the shop through in the ceiling. So it was built into the ceiling. So the only reason that anyone would go upstairs is for that reason, to go to the second safe. Leading up to the robbery, Diana and Robin were having if I could just quickly say what the layout of the post office was, it might be useful. Downstairs was a very large kitchen, their kitchen, and then next door to was the actual shop itself. So the little post office, little shop, really small, little post office, little shop, and outside on the ground floor was a little yard. And then from the back door you go either into the kitchen or straight upstairs into the living quarters. And at that time they were having a big they were having all the kitchen redone, they were having the kitchen redone anyway. They spent money on the kitchen, so everything was upstairs. From the kitchen was upstairs in the living quarters, and they were also getting ready to go on holiday. They were going to America 2 weeks later, I think it was, to see Diana's family, but also they were going to renew the marriage vows. And in preparation for them going on holiday, Diana had all the cases and everything, all their cases laid out in their bedroom. So the bedroom they'd normally sleep in was just covered in cases. Diana was getting ready to iron and pack everything away. So they were sleeping in a spare bedroom at this time, which wasn't normal for them to do that. So anybody anybody who'd been doing like a cursory recce on the place would have expected nobody to be in the spare bedroom where the safe was. So they were sleeping in the room where the safe was, which was very out of wasn't what they normally did. So on the morning of the 23rd, Robin, Diana was got up and left Diana in bed, and came downstairs, unlocked the door at 4:30, and delivery men and everybody arrived in newspapers, and the milkman and stable boys start coming in. Customers are coming in slowly at that time at 4:30, but they're trickling in. And then at 8:30, the gunman arrives and says to Robin, "Don't do anything stupid. We've got your wife." And Robin does what he says, gives him what he asked for, which was to empty the till, empty the safe, and then he leaves by the back door, does the robber, and then Robin runs upstairs and finds Diana. He rings 999, and the operator. In fact, it's interesting. You can hear the 999 call. It's available. And one of the ladies I met at a conference messaged me when they played it on a news clip recently, and she said to me, Michelle said to me, "I always felt that Robin was, from what you've said at different conferences, that Robin was obviously innocent. But she said if I had any doubts and then heard that 999 call, it would have, it was clearly the man was in a terrible state. So it's interesting.
I will add the 999 call as a link to this so that people can hear it.
It's really powerful, awful, heartbreaking phone call. So he's clearly in a terrible state. So the operator advises that he goes, is there anyone that can help him? And he says he's got neighbours downstairs. At the back of the post office, there's only a small little yard, and Robin and Diana shared a little yard with two other houses. So there wasn't a big area at the back of the house, at the back of the post office. So Robin ran downstairs, got help from the neighbour who came upstairs and helped him turn Diana over, and she was no longer alive. And then the ambulance came, confirmed that she was dead, and that was the beginning of their nightmare. Really, that was the beginning.
Okay, so from that point, it sounds like we've had a robber come in one door and hold up Robin, and another has gone upstairs and attacked Diana. So how did we get from there to where we are today?
Well, if I give a quick brief of the timeline, so people know that what the timeline was, and then we'll go back and talk about individual parts of it. So the first robbery was in 2009, March 2009. The second robbery was on the 23rd of March 2010, which is when Diana was killed. Robin was arrested 3 weeks later, and then trial was the following spring in 2011. So almost a year later, it went to trial. And then obviously Robin was convicted at trial. And then the following year, the following June, I think it was, they then went to appeal. They appealed, and they got to the appeals court. Tragically, the appeal was upheld. It wasn't upheld. We didn't win. They didn't win an appeal. And then the following year, Robin then applied to the CCRC, which is the Criminal Case Review Commission, and was unsuccessful. That went on for probably 18 months, to and fro with the CCRC, but that was unsuccessful. We now have another application in, which was put in December of last year, December 2019. So that's the kind of the timeline as to where we are now and where Robin's come, the story. So at the very beginning, the prosecution case, the prosecution case against Robin was two main planks. The prosecution case was that Robin had been stealing from the post office, and that was his motive to kill Diana, because they were going off on holiday 2 weeks later. So the prosecution case was that when a temporary sub-postmaster would come in and look after the post office while they were away, at that point there would be an audit. So what the prosecution said was that Robin had been stealing. His theft was going to be revealed in this audit. So that gave him his motive for killing Diana. There's lots that doesn't ring true with that. Firstly, Diana was actually the postmistress, so Diana did all the books. So Robin didn't. Robin was very much involved with the business, but Diana was the bookkeeper. And also, there's a very just been a huge judgment now to do with the Post Office Horizon scandal, which where the post offices were prosecuting people for wrongfully accusing them of theft, and that also has a big link in there too. There was also an audit should have been available to them at trial from the post office, which would have helped Robin massively. But the post office said it wasn't available; that only became available after trial. So we've got Robin being accused of theft, and then the second plank of the prosecution case was time of death. Initially, the police said that Diana was still probably alive at 6:30ish. But then they changed tack further into the investigation, and I suspect it was because it became obvious that Robin had an alibi after 4:30. Because Robin had opened the post office at 4:30, he had customers coming in. So the prosecution's time of death was they brought in a so-called expert who was an expert on food analysis in the stomach contents of somebody who died, and she gave a very specific window of death. That Diana had been killed between 2:30 and 4:30, which, if that was the case, it could only have been Robin. There was only Robin in the building, so it was a very powerful. And apparently, this expert was, according to Sally and Mark and the family who were at the trial, she was a really, really powerful witness. She wouldn't be moved from this 2:30 to 4:30. So they were the two main planks of the prosecution case. There was a couple of other little smidgens that were going on as well. I mean, the prosecution case was so the the investigation was cherry-picked and ignored huge pieces of evidence and cherry-picked. It was an incredibly weak case. I don't think anybody ever thought that there was ever going to be a conviction. You know, I think everyone was quite confident that there was nothing on Robin, nobody had anything to worry about. Lots of us thought it wouldn't even get in a courtroom, never mind a conviction. And lots of people have said since, people in the village said we didn't realise they should have gone back and said more, or some of their witness statements. For example, some of the witness statements when the police were gathering evidence from the local, friends in the villagers. A few people said it felt like a Robin hunt. It didn't feel like they were investigating a robbery, an armed robbery at the post office and a murder. It felt like they were more interested in what was going on with Diana and Robin and what they did in their private lives. It didn't feel like and one lady said that she asked the police and said, why is XYZ missing from my statement? And they said, oh, don't worry, it's going in another report. So there was things missing but nobody really realised the importance of that at the time, because nobody really thought that Robin was ever going to be a conviction. There was never any evidence on him.
I'd like to come back to that bit about witness statements later, but rather than interrupt your flow, if we carry on with the defence case and all the other bits and pieces that happened in this case.
Yeah. So the prosecutions were the theft and the time of death, and then there was a couple of little smidgens. Which one was that Robin couldn't have possibly, from the moment that the safe was opened to phoning the 999 call was I think it was 79 seconds, and the prosecution tried to say that was it was impossible to do. Well, it was possible to do, and it was the defence team were able to prove that. But from the clocks were out on the till, the clocks were out on the safe, so it wasn't an exact science. But when they tried to remember that the post office is tiny, the shop's tiny, the stairs are just through the door. So for Robin to, if someone's got a gun to your head and tells you that a loved one's in danger, you could move mountains in 79 seconds. And the defence barrister and lawyer went round to the house and they repeated it and did it several times, where they ran up and downstairs more than once within the 79 seconds. And there's also a lady on the green who said that she thought she'd seen Robin the night before, carrying a bag under his arm, sort of suggesting that he was out hiding some money. Again, it came to nothing. Well, it was used in court, but there was another gentleman. What she said was that she was surprised because Robin didn't speak to her. And the reason he didn't speak to her was because it wasn't Robin. Robin was at home in bed across the green. And it was another man who apparently resembled Robin a lot. And he picked his little dog up, and that's what that story was.
Did that other man come forward?
He did,
And
and Mike Norton, private investigator Mike Norton, who was employed very early on the original investigation, said it was shocking how like Robin he was, but he was on holiday, he was away abroad when the trial hit, and there was always a query as to why wasn't he told he either couldn't go on holiday or, usually for witnesses important, and of course it was a very important witness because apparently, according to Mike Norton, he was incredibly like Robin. It could have been his brother. They were the same height, and he said it was a striking resemblance. So he was away abroad.
it sounds like the defence, it should have been cut and dried for the defence. It's they've got very little to actually defend against. So tell me about the defence. Tell me what they argued and how they tackled the case.
Yeah, okay. I think it needs to be said as well that everything that could have gone wrong for Robin went wrong. The investigation was incredibly poor. The crime scene wasn't protected. There was all sorts which we'll go back to about the crime scene, and then the court case. Everything's gone wrong, and of course, when you choose a defence team for a murder, I mean, how many people do you know have to choose? In our lives, we might be able to get recommended an estate agent because many of us move house, and we can recommend a good estate agent or a bad, stay away from them. But you don't do that, do you? When you employ a defence team, how many people do you know have needed a defence team for something like this? So you don't know until it's too late that you've not got a very good defence team. So but did you want me to talk about the defence overall, the evidence supporting Robin's innocence? Is that what?
Yeah, I think it might be better to go back before we come to that and talk about the actual evidence that was available that pointed away from Robin. So tell me about things like the hair and the DNA and things like that.
Well, initially at the crime scene, we know that the police thought decided it was Robin very, very early on, probably within days. We know that for a fact. We can evidence that. But things like at the crime scene, in the bedroom where Diana's hand was, there was a clump of hair, and it wasn't Diana's. Diana had dark hair, and Robin had very short grey hair. This was a mid brown clump of hair. And it was massively important because from that there could have been DNA harvested from it, and of course it was lost. It never got. They were never able to use it because it was lost. It was bagged and moved away. But they showed it on a huge photograph in the courtroom, but it wasn't allowed because it wasn't there in evidence. They'd also said that what they said was Robin had killed Diana while she was asleep. But the crime scene photographs show that, because they said there was no evidence of a fight, of a struggle. But in fact, the contrary, because at the crime scene photographs, you can see that on the bedside cabinet, the lamp's fallen over, the mirror's fallen over, and the witness who came to help Robin had to pick things up to get across the bedroom to help because there was stuff all over the floor from the fights. There was also a very strange thing. There was the police said there was no blood spatter because Robin, there was never any blood on Robin. When they examined his clothes, there was no blood. And the police, when they'd interviewed Robin, at some point had said there would have been a lot of blood. There would have been a lot of blood. Diana had the bed was soaked in blood, and but there was none on Robin. And there was 2 bedside lamps that nobody realised had gone missing, but the police had said there was no blood spatter to be found. And but months later, some experts in London were looking at the crime scene photographs and said, "Where are these lamps?" And so a police officer had to go back to the crime scene because nobody was allowed to go anywhere near the crime scene. It was cordoned off and had been locked up, and of course Robin was arrested by then. And when they examined that, so when the police officer went back with another officer to look for these lamps, they'd been put in the top of a wardrobe, on the top shelf in the wardrobe. So we don't know why anybody would have done that, but they'd actually moved. And when they had examined them, there was blood spatter on them. So whoever had harmed Diana would have been, they certainly would have had blood spatter on them. The other thing about the crime scene, massively important, is that there was none of Robin's DNA on the crime scene. The crime scene is a pillar where Diana had died, and there was none of Robin's DNA on the crime scene. However, there was a mixed profile of at least 3 males on there, as well as another profile of somebody else that we'll maybe talk about that's connected to the bar, the murder weapon. This is a private bedroom. This is a private bedroom, and also on the bar was the murder weapon was a rusty bar, and on it was quite when on the bar was used to murder Diana with, and it was put. I'm getting myself sorry. And you do this. You go around and around in circles, and there's so much to tell that you end up, while I'm talking about that, I need to tell you about that as well. So I apologise. But so the murder weapon. Can we talk about the murder weapon?
Yes, please.
The murder weapon was found 2 days after the murder. So the murder was on the 23rd on a Tuesday, and there was police everywhere from that moment on, and there was fingertip searches going on in the village. But this murder weapon wasn't found for 2 days. And it was found on a very, very high wall, 8.5, 9-foot wall, right at the back of the post office across the road. I'm talking a small road, not a great big motorway road, a little village road. And the police said this was a murder weapon. And initially they said there was DNA on it, a full male profile. It was an unknown male profile to start with, but they said this was the profile of the wielder, whoever had held this weapon and hit Diana with. And then it turned out that the murder weapon, that the DNA was actually belonged to a police officer. Robin's DNA isn't on it, but the police officer who was there when it was found, his DNA is on it. But the troubling thing about all of this is that when the pillar case was investigated for DNA, it became apparent that there's a big linear. There's a linear void in the pillar case which has come from the bar. So what we think has happened is whoever's hit Diana, at some point they've gone to hit Diana, but they've missed and they've hit the pillar case that she was laying on. And in this linear mark, rust mark, is DNA. And in that DNA is a profile of the same officer. Well, that officer wasn't on duty that day. He didn't come on duty until the 25th. So how on earth does a DNA from an officer who doesn't come on duty for 2 days appear on a crime scene that he's never been in? He doesn't go in the crime scene, and which can surely only point to cross-contamination at some point, which can only render that, there was so much wrong with the investigation and the trial. It's incredibly worrying that's happened, that somehow there's been cross-contamination after, how did they come together, the pillar and the bar after we may never know how that happened, but
I think as well there was something about there was still photography of the wall on the 24th and the bar wasn't there.
That's right. Yeah. There was film footage of the actual wall, and the camera pans across the top of the wall. And this was found a long time after trial. This was found probably after the appeal, and people took still photographs of the wall, which has been examined, and people have examined the video footage. And we know for a fact it was on the 24th, the day before the bar was found, and the bar isn't on the wall. It's not there. So at some point the bar's been placed, because what the jury said, what the prosecution case said was Robin had murdered Diana in the dead of night while she was asleep, and then he'd crept downstairs, ran across the road, and then placed this iron bar on top of the wall. There's lots all wrong with that. They never said a time. They just called it the dead of night. It's not something anybody would do. We don't know why anybody would do that. I mean, if Robin had done what they say he has, I don't think he'd run across the road and hide I think he'd find somewhere. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? And also, not only that, when Mike Norton, who is the private investigator, who we met a long time after we met him in 2018 by pure coincidence. That's another story. But he was a private investigator employed by the original defence team back in April, March, back in, it was probably in spring anyway, 2010. And he went back and he tried to recreate the bar on the wall. Because we have the exact spot of where the bar was found from police photographs. And it can't be done. You know, you can't, he's the same height as Robin. And we photographed him trying to do this, and it can't be done. Robin would have to climb up the wall, lean across a telegraph pole, and then lean as far as he could. And even when he let as far as he could, he still couldn't reach the place where they said the bar. And the bar was placed strategically across the top. The other side of the wall, this side of the wall is sort of 8.5, 9 foot, but the other side drops down to there's a hill at the other side. It drops down to about 3 foot. And the people who worked in the garage, there's a garage beyond the other side of the wall. And the people who worked in the garage that day said that they were looking over the wall, watching all this story unfold, the ambulances, the police, people calling me off the road. And, nobody saw the bar on the wall. Because if anything had been left on that wall, they'd have moved it, because children passed, people passed, it wasn't. So there's huge doubt surrounding all of that for Robin.
So one of the other things from memory, so I've got a bit of an echo here. They said there was no suspicious people around in the area. There'd been no suspicious activity in the area, either on the day of the murder or on the lead up to the murder. But that's not true either, is it?
No, it's anything but true. There was tons of criminal activity around, and there was not only was there suspicious activity, Sandra, there was known criminals in Melsonby on the 23rd of March 2010. The night before, we talked about this the other day, that Robin and Diana were massive creatures of habit, and really were creatures of habit. And every Monday night, Robin would go to the cash and carry and pick up fish and chips. They'd go home, or he'd go home, they'd have fish and chips, and he'd take out the expensive stuff out of the little car outside in the backyard. And then the following morning, Tuesday, he'd get up, open up, let his delivery men in, and then service customers, and in between, empty the rest of the goods from the car from the night before, from the cash and carry. On this particular night, on the happenings of the murder, the night before Robin, when Robin went to the cash and carry, 4 CCTV cameras picked up a car following Robin to the cash and carry. Well, we're not saying he's following. It was the same car was picked up on 4 cameras on Robin's journey to the cash and carry. The same car is picked up on his return journey from the cash and carry. And also a fortnight before, there was some when they'd been robbed in 2009, it really upset Robin. It unsettled him a lot, and they did talk about leaving and moving, because it really frightened him. But they didn't, and they lots of people persuaded them to stay, and they loved the life there. So there was things like there was a notice board outside the window of the shop at the post office, and the parish council agreed to move it because Robin was nervous and he didn't have a very good view out of his window. So the parish council were really good, and they moved it. They understood his fears. The post office wouldn't put any security in. That wasn't what the post office do, and they were going to get CCTV, but unfortunately, the money was going to be spent on something else. They didn't spend the money on the CCTV. It was going to go on this fabulous new kitchen they were having done. 2 weeks before the murder, there was some strange characters came into the post office, and other customers were at the time, and actually said to Robin, they look dodgy. They weren't here to shop. And when Robin had said to them, "Excuse me, what can I help you?" They just picked up something and bought it, just to sort of. But they were looking round. They were like the case in the joint, and Robin made a diary note of it. He used to keep a diary in the shop, and he diaried. He noted the name, what the day and the time. I think he did. I'm not sure if he got a car number. I don't know if it went to that much detail, but it was logged. And there was also a strange car that was seen. People spotted a blue car, and somebody crouching down in the car, and then there was there was a motorbike involved, and there was some criminals that had been convicted criminals. They'd done a hole in the wall, like the cash points, hole in the wall. They were convicted known robbers for that, for doing something like that. And they were actually in the village on the morning, and it showed on the sat navs where they'd been, and they just talked it away. They just said they'd been pricing a job up. And they lived miles and miles away. They were from the other side of Darlington somewhere. And the other important point on that was after the murder, there was an anonymous phone call to the Crime Stoppers. There was a Crime Stoppers thing. I think it still exists now. You can ring up with information for the police, and we've seen all this. This is all documented, by the way. This isn't just hearsay. This is all in black and white. And somebody phoned and actually named. This was on the 24th. This was hours after the event. Named somebody, gave them a name, and said this guy, which I won't name, was seen in a crack house yesterday with a load of cash, and said he didn't mean to kill her. That was never what he wanted to do. He didn't mean to kill her. That information was given to the police, and the police said, we know it wasn't him, the name, because he was under surveillance by the police. No one's ever seen evidence of that. No one's ever seen anything to show that was true. So there was a car that was burnt out later on that day or the following day, a few miles away. There was a car that was found burnt out. There was a ski mask and a BB gun, a ball bearing gun. They look very much like guns, but they're not real guns. They were found behind a working men's club about 17 miles from Melsonby, and I think it was Cleveland police found it, and they said, well, we've had no suspicious activity in our area. Knew there'd been a robbery in North Yorkshire, so passed it to North Yorkshire police. Nothing, it's never even been tested for. Mike, the note on the private investigators tried to request them. They've never been tested. They're still, as far as we know, they're in a box in a cupboard somewhere in wherever North Yorkshire police keep their I don't know what they've done. It's never been tested.
Can't call it evidence because they didn't use it. They didn't test it. So just to go back to you mentioned the fish and chips there. So this so-called expert on the stomach contents.
Yeah.
This was based on the fish and chips that Robin and Diana ate on the night before.
Yeah.
But they even managed to mess up the collection of that, didn't they?
Yeah, they do. The police take the fish and chip wrappings from the communal yard and weigh them and get and this so-called expert is then going to decide from the scraps that are left how much Diana ate. But initially, the first time they tried to do it, they chose the neighbour's fish and chip wrappings. They didn't even get the right. Diana's fish and chips wrappings were still in the house, in their kitchen, in a black bin liner, ready to go out into the bin. But what they did was the expert reckons she can give an exact time for the time of death, which it's not an exact science, but she kind of makes out she can. So I'm sorry, I'm losing my thread there a bit. I'm thinking about the appeal court where and how we've been able to prove that her evidence is now being. Shall I talk about that? How her evidence is now being.
That's the next place to go.
The two main facts of prosecution case are theft and time of death. The first one is theft, and at appeal, with an audit, they were able to prove that Robin hadn't stolen anything at all, ever. The business was a healthy, thriving business. The newspapers had peddled that they were in debt. They weren't in debt. It was all managed. They didn't owe anybody any money other than what they borrowed legally, and there was no letters from anyone saying you owe us any money. It was just a story they peddled. So they were able to prove at appeal that no money had ever been taken. The business was actually healthy. And the Court of Appeal accepted that. But then the Court of Appeal said, however, we think it was the time of death the jury convicted on. So off you go back to prison. We accept there's no theft. We can wipe that clean, no theft, but you're left with this one plank of time of death. So Robin, that was it, back to prison. So then there was lots of investigating done on the time of death. And what it turns out happened is this expert, she actually turned out to be, her expertise was archaeological digs. That's where her expertise lay. But she eventually, another expert, a Home Office pathologist, worked along with Robin and discovered that this expert contradicted herself in another trial. And had she used the same method with Robin's as she had in another murder, she would have got a totally different result. And also she got the science completely wrong. Her science was completely wrong. And so now that also, second plank of time of death, has been wiped. Said they rubbished her science. She hadn't, science was wrong. But the other interesting thing about that was that in the courtroom, in the trial, she was this expert, time of death expert, the stomach contents expert, was pitched alongside a very reliable witness who came into play on the day of the murder, of a gentleman who lived in the village, gave a statement to the police saying he heard Diana call to Robin at 6:45 in the morning. He went to the shop every day, he used to go in every morning on his way to work for a paper. He remembers exactly why and what for. He went straight to the police when all hell let loose and everybody arrived at this awful morning. He went straight to the police and said, I heard Diana call to Robin from the back of the shop. Now, she wasn't alarmed. It was just Robin. She wouldn't ever come through to the shop when she had a pajamas or anything on. And Robin just acknowledged and said, yeah, oh, in a minute, Di. He was busy serving customers and she wouldn't come in until customers left. So in the courtroom, what they did was, we have got this very reliable witness who said he heard Diana. He wasn't friends of Robin and Diana. He was just a gentleman who lived in the village, lived and worked in the village. So he's heard Diana's call out at 6:45. What they did in the courtroom, they said, we've got this evidence from this expert about time of death who's saying that Diana was killed between 2:30 and 4:30. Now, we're not saying this gentleman is lying who says he heard Diana at 6:45, but clearly he's mistaken. Because so they don't poo-poo his evidence, but they undermine it because they're pitching him against this expert.
But he had very good reason to remember, to know it was that particular day, didn't he? That witness.
Sorry, Sandra, I didn't hear what you said then. Sorry.
That witness, they said he might have been mistaken, probably meaning it might have been another day. But he had very good reason to remember why it was that particular day, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, he did. He used to do. I think he worked full time. But he used to have one. He worked for the environment and he used to go on to do a different job. He used to go and do some voluntary down by to do with some environmental work. And he was a keen bird watcher, listener. So he had he was a keen bird. So he knew what he'd heard and he was specific about. And he'd gone that day. He went to the police that day. He didn't go to them 4 days later and say, I think I heard it. He actually went to the police that day. And I think he had to go to them twice before they came to get a statement from him. As I say, we know that the police had made their mind up. They cherry picked. They made their mind up that they had their man in Robin, and they didn't investigate so much more that could have been investigated. And then I could never get my head around that. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? But it's been put to me that they weren't very experienced with murder cases in North Yorkshire, and maybe inexperienced, and also they wanted to shut it down as quick as possible because the previous year in North Yorkshire, not far from York, or in fact in York, there was the Claudia Lawrence case, which was a chef who worked at York University who went missing, and her case was criticised. They criticised the investigation. The police were criticised highly because of that. So maybe they wanted to shut this down. Maybe that's why they did it. That was their motive for shutting this down. We've got our man. We don't need to look at anything else. And we're not going to throw the net any wider because we've got the man.
So that then brings us to your involvement, and I have two questions for you. They're related to each other. The first is, I've got an echo again. The first is, why Why do you do this? Why do you continue to do it? Why are you so involved in trying to get the details of this case, the facts of this case, out before a wider public?
A couple of reasons. One reason has become, it kind of evolves, doesn't it? I was saying to Sally yesterday, we never set out to do a campaign. We didn't think, oh, let's do a campaign. It wasn't that. I think they'd come to the end of the line. We'd gone through appeal. We'd applied to the CCRC. Oh my God, that's it. You're on your own. There's nobody out there to help. There's no official body who come in to help you. So my sort of reasons have changed now. Now part of the reason we do it is because public perception has to change. People have to know that wrongful convictions are not rare. They happen. And not only do wrongful convictions happen, to overturn that wrongful conviction is virtually impossible. The system works against you. You're one man, one woman on your own, and you're working against this massive, massive machinery of the police, the CPS, and then beyond that. I once likened it to, I couldn't think of an analogy of how to describe what goes on in the justice system, and I thought about when several washing machines break down, bear with me, when several washing machines break down and a few people's kitchens get set on fire, they do a recall. They recall that machine and say, anybody who's got this Bosch number 64321, stop using it, we're going to send an engineer in, or we're going to take it off you and we're going to replace it. We need the justice system to have something similar, that when it becomes obvious that there's a massive doubt over a conviction, there should be a team. There should be a flag that's raised, that some professionals go in and sit around a table with the family maybe, or with the victim himself, and talk about it and help and work towards that. We've got some wonderful people in the miscarriage world, yourself, Sandra, for one, and Dr. Norton and Glyn Maddox and Dennis Eady, people who are just incredible people who work so hard to make changes, but they're against a big machine. But maybe it'll come, maybe we'll get the change. So that's one reason that we felt it was really important to get public perception changed, because that would help Robin. And when they reached the end of the line, and I've known the family now for a long time, I knew Robin from years ago, but I got back in touch with him obviously when all this happened, and my friendship with his mum, I wrote to his mum after the trial, and nobody thought Robin would get convicted. Nobody thought they'd even get into a courtroom. All his friends, nobody believed it. And I got in touch with his mum, and I wrote to his mum, and she rang me, and I didn't for a minute ever expect to hear from her. I knew she was inundated with letters and calls from people of support, and she phoned me, and I wrote on the letter. I didn't know her first name, so I just wrote "Dear Robin's Mummy," and I wrote this letter to "Dear Robin's Mummy." And then this call one day, I picked up the phone at home, and this lovely voice said, "Is that Jane?" Yeah, she said, "It's Robin's mummy." And I couldn't believe that she'd phoned me. And we had a long conversation, and from that we just became really close friends, and I became a close family friend with Robin and Sally and Mark and the kids, and when you watch your friends going through something like this, and there's not, and the more, of course, the more of the case it was revealed to me, actual statements, and I used to sit at home and read it and think, no, this is just unbelievable. There's so much evidence pointing away from overwhelming, shocking amount of evidence to support Robin's innocence. Sally and I went to a meeting together, a wonderful meeting, the United Against Injustice in Liverpool, UAI. They don't actually do your case, but they put you in a room with people who can help you, and that really was a starting point. So Sally and I went to this meeting, and my little girl came with me, my daughter came with me, and the CCRC were there, which was terrifying. And we from there we met other people who advised us what to do, and those people up there telling the stories. People, and you cried watching these people, because you knew what they were facing, and I said, Sally, there's a people, and she said, I could never do that. I could never stand up there. And I said, well, I will. And when you love your friends, and I do love my friends, you do anything for them. wouldn't you? And even if I hate doing this. I don't like being. I'd rather not. Nobody would do this. But we once had a joke actually about there was an awful photograph that was picked up of me. Well, it was a photograph, and it wasn't very flattering. And I said to everybody, we had to wanted to publicise this meeting or publicise the case, and we had to use this photograph. And I looked at it thinking, which is the most important? This awful photograph going out there, or Robin's justice? I'm going to have to go for Robin's justice. I said, you owe me because we've got to this horrible photograph. And so I don't enjoy doing it. I don't like doing it, but I'd be better at it than Sally. Sally would be a gibbering idiot, you know. Well, I shouldn't say that. You're not a gibbering idiot, Sally. She's incredible. They're all incredible. The paperwork that they've had to deal with, and that's another thing. You could employ people. There's so much work to do. You could employ 2 or 3 people full time to troll through all the work, but you have to do that by yourself. You have to rely on friends to help you do that. And fortunately for Robin, he has got a wonderful family and some fantastic friends from the village. People from Melsonby who are still there. They've never gone away. They write to him all the time, and so that I do it because I love them, and I want to help, and I want to, and it's something that we've done quite well in. We've met some great people who want to guide us and help us, which is just amazing.
So, I mean, you're saying you've become close to the family and you love them. What is it that convinces you that Robin is innocent?
Well, everyone says, and it's true, Robin is the nicest man. You will not meet a nicer, funnier guy. He's genuine, he's non-judgmental. While he's in prison now, he's doing so much work to help other kids, other lads in prison. But even if he was the most miserable, middle-aged, grumpy old, unsociable, unlikable character, the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. It stacks up all by itself. If Robin Garbutt was if he wasn't a nice person, the evidence supporting his innocence is overwhelming. So we always knew he was innocent. We always knew that, if he'd done it, he would have put his hands up to it. There was no way on God's earth would he put his mum and his stepdad and his sister and his family through. There's no way would he do that. If he'd have done it, maybe we've all got a breaking point. Maybe we all know, maybe we all have a point where something gets that bad. But they loved each other. They loved each other very much. There was a few. There was talk in the beginning of the sort of the newspapers peddled the story that Diana was having affairs. They weren't really affairs. She had a couple of flirtations in drink. She had too much to drink and she kissed somebody and there was something else. But the thing was, it couldn't be used against Robin because Robin didn't know about them. Robin knew about the thing with the cousin. He knew about that, and it caused trouble. But that was a year before. That was all done and dusted. They were, life was good, life was happy, and but the evidence stacks up all by itself, stands alone.
One other thing that I wanted to bring in, the post office. So there's been this big case about all these people that were accused, some of them convicted for stealing from the post office. And It turned out that it was actually the post office's own software that it had introduced that was miscalculating and making it look like there was money missing when there wasn't. And they've had quite a success in the courts. The postmasters that took that case to court. So just to clarify, was that the system that was in place in Robin and Diana's post office?
Yeah, exactly the same system. I mean, at appeal, they were able to prove there was at appeal they were able to talk about that. But the Post Office Horizon case is massive because I don't really want to say too much about it really because it's kind of ongoing. They're going to, because Robin's team, Robin has, and his solicitors have another application has gone to CCRC, the Criminal Case Review Commission, which is with lots of new evidence in it. And hopefully this time the CCRC will see that this man is innocent. And even though they've had previous applications, this one's got more clarity in it. And and the lawyers are, as we speak, preparing an addendum, which is an addition to the CCRC application, because the Robin's application went in December, and the judgment didn't come through for the Post Office Horizon case until after the application had gone in. So there's one being prepared now. But I mean, the CCRC have referred loads of cases, which is fantastic. Loads of post office masters. I mean, as you say, some of them went to prison. Their lives were ruined by. And the most troubling thing of all is the post office knew. The post office knew for 10 years and they used to tell individual postmasters. I mean, they've had a massive program on Radio 4. Anyone can find it now. It's out there. I think it's called the Great Post Office something or other. And it's been on Radio 4 every day. Nick Wallace is one of the investigators who worked on it. Journalist. I'm not sure if he's a journalist, but anyway, he's a documentary maker. He's a great guy. And I think there's a program coming on the next few nights on television about it. In fact, he wanted to cover Robin's case. He contacted me and said, "How come we've never known about this case of Robin Garbutt? I can't believe I don't know about this case." And there's hope that sometime he will do something on the case. He's just been so wrapped up in what they're doing now with the Post Office Horizon that he will. At some point, there's a chance that he will do a piece on Robin's case as well, because it all ties in, Sandra.
Yeah, you had another very well-known writer, journalist, do some work on Robin's case earlier.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we had Sally, Robin's sister, after they failed at the appeal, and it was devastating for them. The work that Sally and the family have done is incredible, but Sally came across and contacted an incredible guy called Bob Woffenden, who's an investigative journalist and has written several books and incredibly highly thought of. And he put so much work into Robin. He completely believed it was a miscarriage. And we've got so much paperwork that we hand out. We use it now. That's a photograph of Robin, but we have handouts that we give, and it's a 17-page document that Bob did. He went to the village. He went to Melsonby. He met friends, Barry Conakey, friends of Robin's, and spoke to villagers. And he, stayed over with Sally. He visited Sally and Mark, and never got to meet Robin, unfortunately. And he did so much work. He wanted to take Robin's case to the Houses of Parliament and his number one miscarriage, but Robin was advised by the legals not to do that. The solicitors are often very guarded. They're very nervous about being public about things. I need to say as well that Robin doesn't have the same legal team that he had in the beginning now. That they're no longer there. But Bob worked so hard, but we say that. But sadly, Bob died 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years in May 2018, the 1st of May. So a massive loss to his family and his friends, but also to the miscarriage world, because he really made a difference. He made a massive difference and works. But we do say now, Bob's still working. He's still doing work for us, because we still use his work all the time, and it carries so much credit. We were really, really lucky a few months ago that private investigator Mike Norton. We've got two Mike Nortons in our life. We've got a private investigator, and then we've got the wonderful Dr. Mike Norton from Bristol, who's the founder of the Empowering the Innocent, which we were involved in as well. But Mike Norton Private Eye contacted, Mike Norton Private Investigator contacted Private Eye, and Private Eye contacted us, which was fantastic. And because Bob had done this work, it gave the story so much credit. And Heather Mills, the journalist at the Private Eye, who's lovely, as soon as she saw Bob's work, she knew it was credible, because she knew Bob. So it's like Bob still, although he's not here, his work still helps Robin a lot.
So if you could say something to people who find themselves in the position that Robin and his family found themselves in at the beginning, what would you say to them?
If they knew now what they knew then, it would have been a totally different story. I suppose when it happens to you, anything can happen to anybody. You could get involved in a car accident. You could be in a fight. You could like with somebody said to me quite a long time ago, why are you involved? You know, what I said, not kind of asking me why I was involved, but I said, can you imagine you get burgled, your house is burgled, and in that burglary, you find your loved one has been murdered in that burglary, and imagine dealing with that, and then imagine 3 weeks later, the police come for you and say it was you did it. That can happen to anybody at any point, and if the police decide to make it fit for you, then you're against the police. You're then against the Crown Prosecution Service and the courtroom. I'd say that you take it very seriously. Take it very seriously. And don't. I think what they didn't know they were sitting on the laurels, but what they assumed, what we all assume is the truth will out. We don't have anything to worry about this because in the court case, as it all unravels, the truth will come out. And everyone will know what really happened. I mean, Sally said, Robin's sister said, in that courtroom, everybody knew Robin was innocent. The courtroom was packed. You know, the gallery was packed. Everybody knew. And she said, even when the verdict came in, the prosecuting barrister, even he looked as shocked as everybody else was. Nobody really thought there was going to be a conviction of guilt. And also don't forget there was 12 jurors. Two of them, it was a 10-2 jury that took the majority, so it wasn't an outright 12 jurors. And Paul Robbins said that at the time when the jurors came out, when they came out to announce, he said he knew straight away it was guilty because two of the jurors were crying, and he knew then that what the result was going to be. But it can happen to anybody, and you're on your own. You need to do as much homework as you can, and it's kind of like if your child was poorly in hospital, you'd ask every question there was, and you wouldn't take everything for granted. You'd have to keep asking questions. And the doctor's saying, we're going to do this, and you'd say, why? Why are you going to do that? And I think what happens is you put the lawyers maybe on a pedestal, and you assume they all know what they're doing. You assume they're all very, very good at what they do. And sometimes they're not. And you have to ask and question, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Why are you doing that? And why are we not doing this? Like, for example, Private Eye Mike Norton, he was employed by the defence team right in the very, very, very beginning. And he came up with loads of stuff. I mean, we've still got his reports. His report was massive. He then passes it on to the defence team. Robin's lawyers. Robin never met Mike Norton. Robin's family never met Mike Norton. And he gives his reports to the defence lawyers. They don't use half of it. You know, they didn't use it. Maybe they didn't think they needed to use it. Maybe they thought it's so obvious this man's not innocent. We don't have to really fight very much, but you have to you just got to make sure you do everything absolutely to, but you've got to fight, And poor Max, Robin's brother-in-law, said a few times during the lead up to the trial, said to the solicitors, are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you sure you can do this? Are you sure you're up for this? It's a big murder trial. Are you sure? And they kept saying, of course we are. And of course, once they got the wrongful conviction, a conviction, you're stuffed. There's no way back. That door's closed. And to overturn that is, and Paul Mark said he went into the chambers afterwards and was crying, as you can imagine. I mean, it must have been absolutely terrible. And said you've just managed to get the most innocent man in Britain convicted of the worst crime there is. But there's no going back. You can't undo that. You can. And the other thing to note as well is that a lot of famous miscarriages of justice had to go through at least 3 appeals before they overturned. The Birmingham 6, I think, were they 17 years? 17 years of Birmingham 6, fighting for. Sam Hallam was 7 years. People fight for years. It takes years. And anyone that thinks that they're not working, I suppose people might think that, Robin's case, it's all gone quiet. Well, it's not quiet at the moment, but it's gone quiet. It must have done it. He must have been guilty because he's still in prison. We don't put innocent people in prison, but we do. We do keep innocent people in prison. And that family have been working on this case every day since. There's not a day that goes by. I think Robin sometimes has to put it down and move away from it for a couple of weeks to then come back to it and read it go over and over again. But the system is broken. The system is broken. It needs mending. We need to mend it.
My final question for you, Jane, because we're almost out of time. Would you, prior to this, would you have believed this can happen?
No, not really. No. I think I would have thought it was very, 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 very rare. But Joyce Robin's mum said the same thing. That when you saw on the television news, when there'd been a murder inquiry, and then later on it's find out who's done it, it was the husband or the brother or whatever, and everyone goes, the father did it then, and you just assumed he's been found guilty. He's guilty. I never would have believed that not only can you get a wrongful conviction, which are really not anything but rare, but then once you get the wrongful conviction, you can't overturn it. You have to rely on the system. It's a huge system that doesn't recognise innocence. You're guilty in their eyes, and hopefully things are getting better. With this applications into CCRC now with Robin, and we're praying that they have referred quite a few lately. Their numbers have been really low for referrals, but maybe they're creeping up. They are creeping up. Let's pray that they will see this as for what it is. It's blatantly obvious to anybody that Robin's innocent. And we just need to get him home for his mum. We need to get him back to his family. But no, I never would have believed it, Sandra, never in a million years.
Jane, thank you so much for joining us today. We're telling us about the case. You've done a great job filling everybody in with all the details and helping people to understand that this happens to ordinary people.
Ordinary good people with no convictions, not even a parking ticket, nothing. We said before that you can understand it when there's been a grey area. If someone's already had quite a few convictions, you can understand the grey area there, but not when it's somebody who's. They gathered 500 statements. The police gathered 500 statements about Robin. 500. Not one said anything negative about him, and actually it counts for nothing in the end. It didn't mean anything in that courtroom. His character didn't count for anything. It was just this evidence that was so flimsy, and now would be what the private eye said. The lady in the private eye piece. I wish I could have read it out to you. Really, she finishes saying, "I wonder now what that jury would think if that jury heard this story now, the real story. What would they make of it?" And that's how she leaves her little piece that she wrote. And then what would they make of it?
I'll put that private eye piece on the website as well, so that people can go and read that for themselves.
Thanks.
So, that's us done for today. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, just thank you, Sandra. Thank you so much for helping us. Robin Strolden, Joyce, and Mike, and Sally, and Mark, we're all over the moon. Thank you.
Thank you for launching Truthseeker for us.
Good luck with it. It's going to be brilliant.
Yeah, and I sincerely hope with everything I have that this commission application is successful.
Yeah, so do I. We need it.
Please give my best to Robin and his family, and thank you again.
Thanks, Sandra.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week with another guest. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.